happen. Thank you. Good afternoon. A few years ago, in the 1990s, I was working at Sony, and I went over to Japan to visit the research labs they have at Shinagawa Prefect, and over there I was having a conversation with some of the research scientists. I introduced myself, and I told them at that time I was working at, I was the head of digital media for Sony Pictures Entertainment, which is the movie studio. And the research scientist nodded and said, "Ah, yes, you represent a great database." And I thought, really, that's what they think of us here. We've got two of the greatest motion picture studios, Columbia and TriStar, in Los Angeles, and Sony, who had acquired them in the 1990s. That's how they looked at it. Their perception is this is a giant database of content. Well, that said a few things about how a hardware company manages a content company, but it also started me to think about content in a different way. And when I came back, actually, it shifted my perception a little bit, because I started to realize that, in fact, in a digital environment, it's true, whether you make a motion picture or a game or music, your product competes with all the other information products that are out there. And that's a tremendous shift. And of course, in the last 10 years, we've seen that shift occur with the media companies, the entertainment companies. They've been struggling to find themselves. There are a lot of factors behind this, and today what I want to do is take you through what I think is the most profound and significant change that's going to happen in our lifetime. And it has to do with the incredible, immense amount of information that's being produced, not just entertainment. We have access to more media technology than ever. You're going to see amazing things this week at CES. You're going to see amazing new devices, things that people have been dreaming about, and in many ways, miracles of modern electronics. And just think about this. Back to the time when I was working at Sony, your typical household in the United States didn't actually have a computer. Occasionally they had an old computer from Dad's office or something, but generally speaking, in the mid-90s, people didn't have computers. That was just the time we were starting to bring them in. Even some of the workplaces I had in those days didn't have computers. This is what your typical household had. They had a telephone, a landline phone, maybe a VCR. If they had a set-top box for cable, it was analog. All it did was decode an encrypted cable signal. Maybe they had a 24-bit game console, like the first-generation Sony PlayStation, but really nothing terribly sophisticated in the home. Now take a look. This is your modern household. This is what you've got today. 2010, your typical household is wired. Look at all the gear people have. They now have digital TV sets. Of course, you still have a landline phone, but you're also getting broadband connectivity in most houses now in the US. And that means that all these other gizmos, which have embedded processors in them, are available to people, and they all talk to each other. But that's not all. Because they're networked, they also talk to the network, and they use these protocols. And they also, those open platforms have enabled us to create more ways to communicate than ever were conceived. And all of this has come to consumers in just a short span of about 15 years. Now, many of these protocols were available in research, for researchers and for defense and so forth in the days before the World Wide Web commercialized and made broadly available those technologies to consumers on a consumer level. But really, it's just been in the last 10 years that we have had access to this stuff, and not just at home, but everywhere in our lives. And the result has been this tremendous surge in the creation of information. Today, the rate of production of information is increasing faster than anything else on Earth. If you follow the singularity movement, if you're familiar with Ray Kurzweil and the other prophets of the singularity, you're probably familiar with this notion of increasing, ever-accelerating trends in change, this notion of change that's constant. It's a constant part of our life. And that is true. And Ray Kurzweil will show you these great charts that all have that kind of logarithmic progression, where whether it's telecommunications or microprocessor speeds and so forth, everything seems to be increasing at a logarithmic rate. That is true. But information, the production of information, is increasing faster than anything else that man has created. Just a few months ago, Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, made this statement at a TechCrunch conference, and it didn't get widely noted by the press, which I was very surprised about. He said, every 2 days we create as much information as Google was tracking on the entire internet in 2003. Every 2 days we double the total amount of information. And surely somebody out there in the audience right now is saying, yeah, but a lot of that information is garbage. A lot of that information is just noise. And that's true. That creates all kinds of opportunities for better information retrieval, for analysis, for sifting through that to find the valuable parts. I view that as a great creative business opportunity. But Eric Schmidt's point is worth delving into. I'm going to take a few minutes to dive a little bit deeper into this. Just a month ago, The Economist had a great survey about the wired world, and they included this chart, and there you see it. There's your logarithmic progression of the sheer amount of information that's being created and that ramp. We're just in that knee of the curve, that classic logarithmic chart that shows that we're going to start to double and double and double, ever increasing speeds. And of course, that's great news for the folks in the storage business, because the amount of information, 1.2 zettabytes, just if you're not from the hardware business, I'm not, that's actually 1.2 trillion gigabytes of data that we produce in a year. And of course, that number is set to double and double and double again. So the forecast is very sunny if you're in the storage business. But I think there's a bigger impact that's going to occur outside of your industry. In fact, I think what you folks are creating is going to serve as the catalyst for the next big shift in human civilization. Let me back that up. Let me justify that. Now, in the entertainment and media business where I come from, most people tend to look at this as this kind of convergence between computers and televisions. But I don't actually believe that that captures the whole notion. In fact, I think that's a misleading notion, because computer power is being embedded in just about everything. The much more important convergence is the convergence between the television and the telephone. Now, that might seem a little bit outdated, that image. Really what I mean by that is these high-speed data lines that are converging with just about every display device that's out there. And of course, these days, it's not limited to what's in your household. It's something you carry around with you. The processing power in your pocket is akin to what it took entire buildings in the past to contain. About 10 years ago, I joined a company called Packet Video. They were the first company in the world to put video on mobile phones. Back in 2000, that was a preposterous notion, particularly here in the US, where we didn't have such great cell phone coverage. And people said to me, how are you going to put a video signal to a mobile phone? Today, it's taken for granted. In fact, today, teenagers take all of this stuff for granted, these modern miracles that we carry in our pockets. But what I'm talking about isn't limited to just what's on the, whoa, you're killing me here, man. Thanks. It's not limited to what's in your pocket, what's in your mobile phone, because in fact, computing power is now embedded in just about everything you can think of. Anything that could have a microprocessor, and it will. Running shoes are generating data. Credit cards are now generating data. I just got one of these Echo pens for Christmas, which, by the way, for 130 bucks is the coolest new gizmo I've ever had. It'll totally transform your notion of how you interact with your computer, because the computer is in the pen. Even your passport generates data. A lot of people don't realize this, but many nations now release passports with RFID chips inside of them. You can actually have a chip embedded in your body that'll monitor some aspect of your body processes, body chemistry and so forth, and transmit data. Researchers recently noted that body organs now will be able to send out text updates to your cell phone, so you can actually have your body transmitting data. In fact, you don't even need to be awake to do this. Your body can actually generate information while you're asleep. This is a new gizmo that you can use for biofeedback. If you wanted to practice lucid dreaming or some other monitor your sleep behaviors, this thing actually traces your brainwave activity while you're asleep. So we're even generating information when we're unconscious. In fact, we generate information when we're not even realizing. We walk around town. There's been a tremendous surge in the past 10 years. In 2000, I spent time with the folks at Philips Electronics, and they told me with a great deal of pride that they had just installed 30,000 cameras, 30,000 surveillance cameras in the city of London. And that sounded like a really big number. I was like, wow, 30,000. Well, today that number is 500,000, and it's increasing. In the UK right now has the most surveillance cameras per capita of any country in the world. They estimate there are about there's one surveillance camera for every 5 citizens of the UK right now. US countries, some US cities are not far behind. In New York, for instance, there are thousands of cameras in the New York subway system, although unfortunately only half of them work because they were installed improperly, and there's a lawsuit going on. But we're in this phase now where these cameras are starting to be everywhere. If you look around any city street, you'll start to notice a lot of surveillance cameras. In the 1 square block radius around George Orwell's home in London, there are 25 security cameras within a 1 block radius. Now, as you walk down the street, technologies for facial recognition and other pattern recognition, like gait recognition, are also throwing off data. So just as you move around, you're generating more information. Increasingly, scientists are starting to look at the human body as a body of information. This is a human genome, and of course, if you've even paid a scant amount of attention to research in the human genetics, you know that each of these projects generates a vast amount of data. So our bodies are becoming viewed as a kind of an information-generating process. It's not just limited to what happens with me or my gear and my stuff. obviously when you come to an event like this, you notice that other people are also generating activity. So we're commenting about each other. And right now I'm sure people are blogging this or Twittering it or Facebooking it or whatever is happening. That's very common behavior, right? And so there's commentary on top of other information. This is metadata that's being generated by us. Unsurprisingly, there's been a tremendous growth here. Once again, you're going to see this recurring logarithmic growth pattern here. Here's Facebook users' growth. This is a big story of last year, 500 million Facebook users. What a lot of people don't realize is Facebook has emerged as the largest media sharing platform on the planet. Who knows how many photos are uploaded to Facebook each month? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Anyone? Anybody? Yeah. No. Wait, you're way off. Yeah. Nope, it's not 100,000s. 2.5 billion with a B. 2.5 billion photos a month. But think about it, 500 million users, if everybody uploads a couple of photos a month, that's not hard to get to 2.5 billion. 30 billion photos were uploaded to Facebook in 2010. If that trend continues, and I do not see it slowing down. I see no reason that it will not continue. Facebook will exceed 40 billion photos uploaded in 2011. That's a staggering number of photographs that are being uploaded. But that trend holds true across the board. Look at these flip cameras now. The price point has dropped to 125 bucks for a high-definition camera. There is no barrier to entry for someone who wants to create video programming. In the past, if you wanted to make a film, you had to get a film camera, you had to know how to expose, you had to know how to develop, you had to have money for processing. That was a pretty high barrier to entry for a young filmmaker. Today, the barrier to entry to filmmakers has been eliminated entirely, and as a result, there's been a tremendous surge in the amount of video that's being uploaded. This is great news if you're in the storage business. Hours of video uploaded per minute to YouTube. This has doubled in the last year. 35 hours of video is uploaded every minute of every day to YouTube. A day and a half's worth of video is uploaded every minute to YouTube. Last year, I was looking at this data, and in a given month, YouTube users would upload the equivalent of, if you took the 3 major broadcast networks in the US and had them broadcasting original content for 24 hours a day, which they've never done, from 1945 till the present. That amount of video was uploaded every 2 months by YouTube users last year. This year, that happens every month. This is extraordinary. The rate at which we are generating new information is staggering. It's very hard to get your head wrapped around this concept. Usually, this is your experience of it. When you're a consumer, you find out about how much data is going on, how much content is being uploaded and consumed by people when you run into a notification that one of these services has crashed temporarily because they just can't deal with the scale, the massive volumes. It isn't just people commenting on other people, and it isn't just us throwing off information in our own lives and writing our own blogs and so forth. It's also entire libraries, entire archives of content are coming online now. It's very common for universities to talk about their content. They realize that putting their best professors' content on the web is actually the best advertising they can do for their universities, for their kind of educational curriculum. And it isn't just universities. Every institution is doing it. And those institutions that don't have digital information, well, they're finding new ways to scan it and make it available to people. We're entering a time where, for the first time ever, anyone on the planet Earth is going to have access to the sum total of all the information that our civilization has created. This is an extraordinary time. Then there are companies that are gaming the system. Companies like Demand Media, who have these vast content farms that are they're in the business of generating content at the lowest possible cost per page view. So there's companies that are out there just generating content for the sake of generating content. They're not really trying to be content publishers of quality with an editorial point of view, but they're simply there to add new tonnage to the amount of information that's out there. The introduction of RFIDs and other wireless technologies means that products on shelves and products in warehouses and products in the process of being transported are also going to be able to communicate with us as well. So this isn't limited to people, because now we're entering this universe of things that can talk to each other, things that can communicate, not just products, not just consumer products and parts and so forth and inventory, but even livestock. These cattle all have RFID tags, and they each generate 250 megabytes of data a year. Don't ask. I have no idea what the information that those cows are generating is. Perhaps it's a methane level or something. The point is that we are tagging everything now and creating possibilities for everything to be monitored and throw off a little bit of information. Here's the Large Hadron Collider. And of course, most giant science projects now are undertaken with a view to generating data, and this thing has thrown off tremendous amounts of data. They measure data, with the Large Hadron Collider, they measure data in a unit called barns. I'm not a physicist, so I have no clue what a barn is. It's big. If you look at this chart, you can see down toward the bottom, in 2008, they were generating picobarns. And just last year, they started to crank up the number of collisions they can do, the number of particles in the collider. And as a result, now they're generating inverse femtobarns of data. And again, you see that logarithmic scale. There's just tremendous uptake or increase in the amount of information generated in the Large Hadron Collider. This is also true with the Hubble telescope. This is true in just about every field now of scientific research. They're generating more data than they can even process, which create great opportunities for people who are in the information analysis and processing and filtering and retrieval businesses. It isn't just people. It's also our homes. There are more than 75 million smart homes, smart meters installed on homes, and that number is set to triple within the next 4 years. So by 2014, there'll be over 200 million smart homes, homes that have smart meters. Now, these systems monitor just about every system in a home, and so they're monitoring for energy use and so forth, but that's not all. Smart homes are now networked as well. So think of it just like computer terminals on a network. You're now going to have smart cities, a smart grid, and so this will help cities plan infrastructure and help them load balance and so forth for power consumption, many other things. And so you have the city is starting to talk to each other and generate even more information. And we're going to be driving around in cars that throw off data. Today's automobile has the average car has about 25 computer systems on it. That's more computing power than was on the NASA spacecraft in the original Apollo missions. So your typical car now is like this space-age thing that throws off tons of data. Most of that data today is not flowing out of the car in the form of telemetry, but that will change. So cars will start to generate data that's captured and stored and so forth and tracked. In certain countries, you're starting to already see that because they're using it for traffic enforcement, speed enforcement, and so forth. Here's infrastructure. So this is not science fiction, folks. All of these things are in the state of deployment right now. This is the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, and most cities now are installing monitors and meters and so forth on city infrastructure to manage it. We're also installing monitors in oceans. These ocean monitors will track seismic activity. They're going to help explore for energy sources. They track currents and ocean temperatures and so forth. And so we have kind of this growing network of devices around the world that are talking to each other and talking to us. In the sky, not just satellite communications, but also these unseen things hovering around, these drone aircraft and blimps and so forth. You can even buy one. They're now consumer grade level. You can buy your own hovercraft and attach a digital camera to it if you want to spy on your neighbors. Great stocking stuffer for a geek. It'll cost about $300 on the web, but this is a little homemade hovercraft that you can get. What's the upshot? The point is that we're starting to develop a nervous system that connects the entire planet together. And as you can see from this diagram, we're not even there yet, folks. We got a long way to go. Sure, North America, parts of the coastal countries, Europe, parts of coastal China and Japan are very densely wired, but vast stretches of the planet remain unwired. So this is growth potential. Make no doubt about it, this planet is becoming self-aware. Because we act as the eyes and ears for the planet, right? All these sensors that we're installing and the cameras in our phones and the cameras that we carry around with, these are all ways for us to kind of talk about the environment, make it possible for the environment to talk back to us. Now, it's my theory that all advances in human life are governed by access to information. And let me explain what I mean by that. Information drives the advance of civilization. So if you look at the advance of human civilization through eons, you'll see that actually plateaus. It's not this continual progress. Of course, it does always get better, and this last decade is the best decade we've ever had. We're about to have a next decade that'll be even better. I'm certain of that. It's a great time to be alive. But every time a human civilization plateaus, it's because we've maxed out our information sharing capabilities. Then we develop a new media technology that makes a breakthrough happen, and so new media technology is what governs the rate at which we can share information. Therefore, I would argue that media technology shapes human civilization. And give me a second just to back that up. Let me show you 3 great leaps that we're all familiar with, but I'm going to present them to you in a way perhaps you haven't heard before in this context. The first one is the invention of speech, really man's first technology. This separated us from animals and enabled people to gather in tribes, communicate with each other for their self-defense, their protection, their ability to get nutrition and nourishment. So that was really the first big shift, is human civilization emerged from our ability to manage spoken language. Now, spoken language as an information storage medium is not particularly good, because if your average lifespan is only 20 years, there's only so much data you can transfer to the next generation that they'll be able to understand. And as a result, human civilization didn't progress terribly much. They don't know, obviously, what time frame this was. It could have been anywhere from 50 to 100,000 years in the past. But human civilization definitely made a leap forward. This is really when humans separated themselves from animals. The next great shift was the invention of writing. In Sumerian culture around 5,000 years ago, they started using clay tablets to record data, and this enabled mankind to transmit data much more broadly geographically than a small tribe, and also on a much greater scale that would last many generations. And as a result, they started to record everything. They started to have an economy that worked. You could track who lent what to whom, or how many units of what was purchased. Calendars became very important, and of course, for an agrarian society, the calendar enabled them to manage the growth cycle, know when to plant. They needed to record this information as well. The first laws that governed civilizations were introduced in these early cultures. First the Sumerians, then the Chinese, the Indus Valley, these first great mega cultures that emerged with great architecture and great agricultural systems and great hydraulic irrigation systems. They were all based on the ability to transmit information through written media. So media for communication of ideas is what drove us to the next level of civilization. Of course, it's impossible for us to imagine what that transition was. But the next one is actually something we can think a bit about, which is the invention of the printing press in the mid-1500s by Gutenberg. This transition is one that's very well documented. So we have a fairly good understanding of the oral culture that dominated in the Middle Ages and the tremendous shifts that occurred afterwards. I'll just show you 3 examples. Gigantic consequences from the introduction of the printing press. Within 50 years of Gutenberg's death, Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the door of the church in Wittgenstein, and the church's monopoly on information that had dominated the previous 500 years was shattered. Because Martin Luther's revolution was a print-based revolution. He was smart enough to have multiple copies of his 95 Theses printed up in advance and circulated to his allies. So the church couldn't stifle him the way they had in a previous culture when it was verbal or oral. Shortly after that, 100 years later, René Descartes, in the middle of the picture there, René Descartes perfected the scientific method. And for the first time ever, researchers, scholars, were able to test ideas identically in 2 different places in the world. So they could replicate an experiment and then replicate it and transmit the results, and someone could replicate that experiment someplace else and comment on it and so forth. And this enabled mankind to start to share information, and there was a tremendous surge in the amount of information that occurred after Descartes had sort of codified the scientific process in a way that everyone could follow. So a tremendous surge in the amount of information after that. The beginning of modern physics, mathematics, chemistry, and biology all stem from that introduction. The next phase, of course, just 100 years after that, John Locke and other philosophers of the Enlightenment started to argue that there were natural laws that govern human relations, and the principles of freedom, and the freedom of expression, the freedom of motion, the ability for people to have a voice or a say that counted. Well, this led to modern-day democracy. So in some respects, we're still living in Gutenberg's times. We're still living with the legacy of the Gutenberg Revolution. But my argument to you today is that by virtue of this giant digital network that's spreading around the world and the sheer amount of new information that we're capturing and generating, that we're about to enter a new shift, a new phase of civilization. We can track some of the vectors of change, and it's impossible for us to nail down exactly what's going to happen, because this is all happening right now in real time. I do know that it's larger than 500 million Facebook friends. This is a gigantic shift. Let me try to take the risky move here, projecting out a little bit about what's going to happen in the future. The first area, the first vector of change I would direct you to is your role. Your role. In a print-based society, your role is to read a book. It's a very passive role. You sit there, right? And in many respects, modern-day publishing, electronic publishing, television, radio, it's the same thing. Those media create an audience, and the audience is meant to be passive. They listen while somebody like me talks, right? It's like this speech that we're giving right now. That's a very passive way. But in this new two-way network that we're moving into, this new two-way world that we're moving into, there's no more passive audience. The audience is an active participant. Now, you folks know that. You know that from the game industry. You know that from blogging. You know that from Facebook and Twitter and so forth. Everyone's a participant. We all know that. So I'm not going to talk about what I usually would talk about, the fields that I'm in, gaming, mobile communications, and so forth. Instead, I want to talk about the news, because one of the things that we overlook, we know that, of course, the printing press invented or made possible the creation of many new types of content, modern-day literature. You know, within 100 years of Gutenberg's death, Cervantes invented the novel, and Shakespeare invented the modern drama. And so the book itself enabled these new types of communications to occur. But also in that time frame, the very first fledgling newspapers emerged. They're more like newsletters. And what happened is in the courts of Europe, there would be different factions that would argue for one point or another, and they found it convenient to put their thoughts in writing. And so they started to create these newsletters that would circulate around the court. It was limited only to those who could read, of course. We're talking about the 1600s here. By the 1700s, though, you had this concept of news, and publishers would update the news. They'd generate the news every day. Now, the creation of the news created this concept of an audience whose opinion mattered, right? I mean, in previous centuries, the nobles, the clergy, they didn't care what the peasants thought. They weren't accountable to anybody, so there was really no reason to tell them the news. And by the way, things weren't changing that fast. There wasn't that much news to share. But certainly you didn't have a situation where the people who were governing bothered to communicate with the people who were being governed. Well, that shifted tremendously, and the printing press made that possible, because once it became possible to persuade people to a point of view using the news, of course, that was the emergence of modern-day politics. And here you have a woodcut that's 300 years old that shows the idea of printing two diametrically opposed points of view up on the wall to try to persuade that concept of a public. Okay, that's the Gutenberg era. We're all familiar with it. But look at how it shifts today, and look how fast this is occurring. In May 2009, a revolution of sorts occurred, a protest, let's say, in the streets of Tehran in Iran to protest a disputed election. There was some doubt about the merits of the election, the way it was held, and so people started to complain about that. The government didn't like that. They tried to repress it and shut that protest down. And so CNN found that they were kicked out of Iran. Obviously, the Iranian press wasn't covering this. They tried to do a total blackout. And BBC actually had their equipment confiscated. So traditional media was shut down. They were blacked out. But people still took to the streets because they used things like Twitter and other social media to organize themselves. And so you saw the emergence of an entirely new dynamic, self-organizing networks of people that don't actually have leadership. There's no one behind this that's orchestrating the whole thing. It's a self-organizing network where people use the two-way network, and they use their cell phones to record it, share it, upload it, tell people where to meet, when to meet, and so forth. And by the way, this was a little bit murky back in 2009 when this was occurring in Iran, and I'm aware that there are multiple perspectives about that issue. What I want to do, though, is use that as a starting point. And in fact, today, just in the last several months, there have been protest movements all over the world. This one from Korea, when the G20 summit was occurring there. But we saw this happen in the UK. We saw this happen in Eastern Europe, Latin America, where people are taking to the streets in massive numbers to express a point of view. But it's not orchestrated by someone who's persuading them, using mass media to persuade them. Instead, people are using social media to organize themselves. This is an entirely new phenomenon. Now, another vector of change that I want to direct you to, value creation. This is something that we struggle with in the entertainment industry. Where do we find the value? How do we capture the value we're creating? We know that our products have value. Our motion pictures, our music, our games, we know they have value, but in a two-way network, it's very, very difficult for us to capture that value. Well, I think that's going to change as well. Another way to look at the book, Gutenberg's invention, this bound book, it was really the first media product. It was the first time somebody took content, information, and bound it into a package with a pretty cover on it, wrapped the whole thing up and said, here, this is a new product. I just gathered this information together. In many cases, they were reprinting text that already exists or information that was otherwise available, reprinting and repackaging, and the packaging of it was the value. So content as a product was a major breakthrough innovation by Gutenberg and by the publishers of that time, and it hasn't really changed much, the publishing business. Even today, the electronic media business, many of the rules for publishing were established 500 years ago, so that hasn't evolved tremendously much. But as soon as these products are digitized, these content products are digitized and hit the network, they lose all their value. It's no longer possible to control the value, to capture the value. We've seen this occur with the MP3s, music, and so forth. The US government is experiencing this right now with WikiLeaks. It's very hard to control the flow of information and manage it, keep it scarce if that's what you seek to do. So many companies have adopted a new approach, which is to shift towards providing services instead of content. Here are some of the examples of the service companies. These are companies that say, hey, have access to as much as you want. In some cases, like Zynga, it's entirely free. Come in and just play the game as much as you wish. We'll monetize usage later. So they're figuring out a new way to capture value. But I would argue that that's shifting as well, and there's a new phase that's happening where the metadata that's generated is being harvested. The metadata that's generated by user behavior is now being harvested by a new generation of companies, and that's where the new value is coming. So we're seeing a shift from content as a product to content as a service to now metadata as the point of value, the locus of value in a two-way network. Some researchers recently took a look at Twitter, and they said, gee, I wonder if you could just measure sentiment. If we just look for certain emotional words and track those in Twitter, could you predict how the stock market is going to move? They're not looking for people who are trading stock or talking about stocks. They're just measuring the words people are used. Words are weighted for positive sentiment or negative sentiment, and they found they could get within 84% accuracy in predicting the stock market, just judging from the sentiment trends, just by harvesting the sentiment of people who are Twittering. A company that I'm working with, I recently joined the board, a company called Visual DNA, is doing this in a very sophisticated fashion in the UK, and they're just about to come here in the US. So what they're doing is they help publishers understand who their audience is. They profile the audience, and then they watch that audience as they move through the content, as they click from page to page to page, and they start to build up a profile of that audience, and they're able to generate value from that. That's tremendously important for advertisers who are trying to reach an audience, and they want to reach a very specific segment. This behavioral targeting segment is one of the liveliest segments of any type of internet publishing right now. You'll know that the hottest area right now in advertising on the web is display advertising. It's up for grabs. Google entered the market. Yahoo's a big player. There's a lot of other players in that space, some 500 companies vying for it. But behavioral targeting, the ability to take data that people throw off, metadata, the data smog that they generate from their behavior on the web, and convert that into something that makes it possible to track and target that audience is a very hot sector right now. One last example of this, taking data and turning it into something valuable. How many folks know what this is? Does anyone know what this is? This is Club Never Die. Have you ever heard of it? Of course you haven't. You're not geeks. You guys don't play online games. Club Never Die doesn't exist in the real world. It's a virtual game. It's a virtual nightclub inside of an online game. The online game is called Entropia. But Club Never Die has real-world value. The guy who bought it, he didn't create it. He bought it from somebody else. He mortgaged his house 4 years ago, raised $150,000 with that, and bought Club Never Die. He mortgaged his real-world house to buy a virtual nightclub. Then he pumped it up and did a great job of running events in it and so forth, sold it for $600,000 to some other punter who thinks he can grow it for even more. Virtual goods sales in the US will exceed $2 billion this year, and worldwide it's probably on the scale of $4 to $5 billion. This is stuff that doesn't exist. Bear in mind, this guy doesn't own the game. He doesn't even own this club, really. It's a virtual club that exists inside of a virtual world that's owned by someone else. It's bits on a server, but it's got real-world value. It's got real-world value. So we're shifting from product to service to now harvesting data, and data itself, data about usage, where people are going, virtual objects. These things are starting to have real-world value. The last trend, this is the last trend I want to cover today. I could go on all day because I'm so excited about this, but this is the last one I want to cover with you. Metadata. So a content company has been aware of metadata for a long time, but we haven't actually done a lot with it, and it's really very versatile. That's the data that goes along with the content product that people see, the information that is around. It turns out there's metadata everywhere, and my belief is in this two-way network, it's going to shift from being totally invisible to consumers to something that's actually front and center. Let me give you some examples that are from the real world. So back to the printing press, just the world that we live in. The printing press wasn't just about books. It also made a visual world possible. And one of the most important kinds of visual information were atlases. People were fascinated by atlases. And so really, at the same time that the printing revolution was occurring in the 1500s, you had the great age of discovery.